Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the University of Michigan School of Social Work Field Instructor Training. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I know you all are very, very busy, and we are very excited to share some information for you as you prepare to take on some students and mentor some students. So again, thank you so much for being with us today. So just a couple, that's okay, you can move to the next slide, that's good. Just a couple Zoom keeping items to share with you. So all attendees are muted upon entry, but you do absolutely have control over your own audio, and there will be some interactive time for discussion. So we look forward to having you unmute as you feel comfortable. We will also be leveraging the chat as well. If you don't mind keeping your mic muted during the presentation, though, that would be greatly appreciated. Feel free to use the raise your hand function in Zoom if you do have a question. Field instructors must also answer all poll questions and participate in breakout sessions to qualify for CE hours today. So if your poll questions are not working for whatever reason, because Zoom sometimes does not cooperate with us, you can actually answer the Zoom or the polls in the chat, and that will still count as well. We'll pull those records for you as well. And then we'll have about 30 minutes at the end for wrap up and to answer any other questions that you might have at the end. Next slide. Here's the agenda for today. We're going to go over, of course, what is field education and talk a little bit about the learning process, supervision, and feedback. We'll have a time for large group discussions, a little more interactive. Then we'll go through the essential elements of field education and then break out into small groups, which is a nice time to meet some other colleagues and have a more focused conversation around answering your specific questions. And we'll go over field instructor tips and review at that time, and then come back as a large group again to kind of wrap up, talk about evaluations and answer your questions. Next slide. My name is Erin Kong. I'm the new director. I started last August, and I'm going to say that for one more semester. So I'm the new director of field education here at U of M. This is our amazing team. I'm going to have 2 slides worth. Dr. Yatisha Robinson is our assistant director, and we are currently looking to refill our residential assistant director position. Our amazing administrative team and field placement coordinators are listed there. And today, our administrative team, Kendra Clark and Celia Maher, will be helping us with the technological side of things today. So thank you both for today. Next slide. And this is our amazing field faculty team. Field faculty, they will explain their roles shortly, but these are going to be your main contacts in the field office. Again, they'll kind of go over their roles a little bit more today. Today, Professor Zaina Busi and Nitesh Singh will be leading us through much of the content today. Slide. And with that, I will turn it over to Professor Busi.
Thank you, Professor King. So good morning, everyone. My name is Zaina Busi, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. And let's get to know who's in the room right now. So we're going to do a poll question, start with a poll question. How long have you been a field instructor? So I'm not able to see the results. Is there anyone able to see the results? Oh, there we go. So a large portion of our attendees today are brand new field instructor at 25%. And then we have 19% for 1 to 3 years, 5 to 10 years, and 10 plus years, and 13% at 3 to 5, and less than a year is at 6%. So we do have a nice combination of different experiences as field instructors. So whether you're a seasoned pro or just getting started, your experience is going to bring a unique perspective to our discussion today. So thank you. Next slide, please. So as Erin shared, we're excited to share some information with you to get to know one another. Our learning objectives for today are we take a look into the role of field education and talk about how field experiences serve as an important part of social work education, where really our agencies and you as field instructors are providing real world learning opportunities. We'll talk about differences between the role of a teacher and that of a supervisor, and how these 2 unique roles contribute to student development. Research and our student tells us that effective supervision can make all the difference in students' growth and success in their practicum experience. So we'll spend a little time discussing and working through this important point of field education. To understand best practices in giving and receiving feedback to students, we'll talk a little about art of constructive feedback, and we'll also explore strategies for both delivering and receiving gracefully. So let's start. I want to emphasize that your questions and participations are highly encouraged. So feel free to share your thoughts, experiences, and insights. So let's start. Next slide, please. So what is field education? Our MSW program and field education is known for asking students to take a moment to reflect on their experiences. So to ground us in the conversation, let's take a moment for some self-reflection. And so what comes to mind when you hear the words field education? What does it mean to you? It's a concept that can have different meaning based on individual experiences. So what does field education mean to you in your own words? And I just want you to sit with it and reflect on your own. Next slide, please. So field education, as recognized by the Council of Social Work Education, stands as a cornerstone of social work education. So it serves as a signature pedagogy embodying the essence of our profession. So field education is the process of developing the needed skills and competencies of social work practice. So in short, it's where the rubber hits the road and your teaching and your supervision students can build concrete skills in real time while serving individuals, families, and communities. Next slide, please. So these are the Council of Social Work Education competencies that all MSW students are working towards, regardless of what pathway they are in. These are some of the same competencies for all MSW students throughout the United States. So I want you to note how these competencies are very similar to the previous set, but have been condensed. So let's explore more about the idea of your role of a supervisor and a teacher. So considering field instruction and your own role, how many of you thought of yourself as a teacher? So you could raise your hand or click on your raise hand or reaction button. So I've been a field instructor for a while, and I really haven't really thought of myself as a teacher, but as a supervisor when I had students from field or from the MSW program. So when you take a look at this slide, what stands out to you? Feel free to, use the chat and share there. What stands out to you? Yes, the teacher is larger. So the supervisor is there, but smaller than the teacher. So in field education, the teaching role is considerably more extensive and slightly more intricate when compared to the supervisory role. So as a teacher, you're going to prioritize individual learning. You're going to craft assignments that align with the student objectives, while the focus of the supervisor really lies on evaluating performance and completing specific tasks. So let's explore your role as a field instructor and the distinction between the two domains, supervision and teaching. So many of us cherish our educational journey. As you think about moments when you were learning, whether it's creating a genogram or passing essential policy courses, I remember when I was a student in field, my most vivid memories really revolved around field experience. So during that time, we're fusing classroom knowledge with practical application. We're showcasing our competence as future social workers, and we're really initiating the construction of our own professional networks and building our networks or professional networks. So now as practitioners, field education offers you a distinct opportunity. It's one of teaching and overseeing our MSW students. So just like as we're seeing in the diagram, the teaching role is considerably more extensive and compared to the supervisory role. So a teacher prioritizes individual learning. You're going to crafting lessons that align with their student objectives. Next slide, please. So what's the difference? As a field instructor, it really means you're going to be wearing two hats. the teacher and the supervisor. And when you look at it at first, it seems very similar, but they're very distinct in their focus and functions. So the teacher's primary focus is, like I said, individual learning. So think of a teacher as a facilitator, someone who guides and supports the student's journey. You're going to be creating an environment of affirmation and learning. And most importantly, the teacher's influence is based on the perceived value they bring to the student's growth. When we look at the supervisor column, it's more task oriented. They come with a specific agenda, and their role is to evaluate performance and to ensure particular tasks are completed. So unlike the teacher, the supervisor's influence stems from a position as a requirement from the job. The primary focus for a supervisor is really achieving desired outcomes. So I do want to emphasize that both roles are important to the field education experience, but they differ in their focus and their relationship dynamics, influence, and the outcomes they aim to achieve. So the teacher nurtures individual learning, while the supervisor manages performance and task-related objectives. So you'll be taking on the teaching role in your organization, which has a really greater impact. You'll provide concrete opportunities such as shadowing, observing, role-playing, and practice to help your students develop social work competencies. So by providing feedback and guidance, you're giving your students a chance to reflect on their learning along the way. I know some of you are task supervisors, so you'll be collaborating with students and field instructors to identify meaningful learning experiences. So as task supervisors, you're responsible for the day-to-day on-site guidance for projects, cases, or tasks. So in your role and field, I want you to engage with the students to begin to think on their own. You see them as a learner as opposed to a staff member, and you'll respond differently to them when maybe challenging experiences happen. So for example, if your student is coming in late to their on their assigned day, do you respond with a performance improvement plan as you would with a staff member? Or instead, can this become an opportunity for teaching your student about professional identity and technical standards in our field and in your organization? Next slide, please. So time for another poll. True or false? In field education, the role of the field instructor is primarily focused on learning versus performance. Right? The answer is, next slide, please, true. Because field education typically emphasizes the development of knowledge, skills, and competencies through experiential learning rather than immediate job performance or productivity. Okay, next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about how students acquire knowledge. First, there's a formal training component, which accounts to about 10% of skill development. And this involves traditional classroom learning, e-learning modules, or even absorbing knowledge from books and other educational resources. And I will admit, when I first saw this information and research, I was a little bit surprised by this. So it really gets interesting as we look at the 20% of skill development comes from the invaluable feedback students receive while observing, collaborating with, and learning from mentors, coaches, and experienced leaders. So this hands-on guidance and insight really proves to be transformative. So here's where the real game changer was for me, at least, and maybe for some others. 70% of skill development occurs right in the heart of the action, on the job, in field. This is where students roll up their sleeves and tackle real world challenges. They engage in tasks and they really hone their problem solving abilities. It's the hands on experience and the ability to adapt and learn while doing that truly shapes their skill set. So, as field instructors, you play a very important role in that 70%. You're right there on the front line. You're guiding students through their hands on experience. You're helping them navigate challenges, and you're also facilitating their growth in both the areas they want to develop in, but also those that you recognize as essential for their professional journey. Next slide, please. So we will chat a little bit about learning process Bloom's taxonomy, and this was crafted with a mission to provide a universal language for educators to exchange ideas about learning and assessment methods. It's all about inspiring our students to reach for those higher order thinking skills while building upon the foundation of the lower level cognitive abilities. So think of Bloom's taxonomy as a stairway to smarter thinking. It's like climbing steps, and each step representing a different level of brain power. So we'll start on the very bottom. It says remember. And this is the bottom step where you just recall information or facts. The next step up is understanding. And this is where you get what the information means. There's that connection that's happening. The next step is applying. This is when you use what you know in new situations. After that, you break down information to understand it better, which is analyzing, the analyzing step. Evaluating is where students start judging and deciding based on what they've learned. What do I decide to do next step? Which intervention do I use? And finally, when you're at the top step, this is where creating happens, where you use your knowledge to make something new or think up fresh ideas. So teachers use this framework to see where students are in their learning and to help them reach creativity. Next step, please. So now that we've talked about field education and ways you as a teacher can help students learn and develop social work skills, let's talk about another critical part of your role as a field instructor, which is feedback. So feedback is just not a component, it's really an important component. It's the secret sauce that spices up the learning experience. So there's this one thing about feedback, it's not a one-way street. We're not just here to dole out feedback. We're creating a relationship, an environment where we want feedback from our students too. So it's like a dance, and both partners are going to be moving in sync, and both partners are constantly learning and improving. So between the field instructor and the student, there's going to be constant learning and improving. So giving feedback can be hard. We think of it as think of it as, we could avoid giving. Sometimes we think of it as being mean, we try to avoid giving and receiving it, or we try to hint and hope. We're like hinting and we hope that the student is going to understand what we're trying to say. So I've been there, we've all been there. We drop subtle hints and we cross our fingers and we just hope that the message gets across, but we can do better than that. Instead, deliver effective feedback on the spot using the SBI method. So situation, behavior, impact. So I'm going to repeat this again as a hint. SBI is situation, behavior, and impact. It delivers effective feedback on the spot. It's a secret weapon for effective supervision. So when you encounter a situation, observe specific behaviors and discuss the impact. You're not just giving feedback, you're delivering it with precision and purpose. So let's talk a little bit about the principles of effective feedback. whether it's positive or critical. It should be timely, clear, specific, non-judgmental, and actionable. Think of it as a blueprint for building improvement. So we're going to talk about each situation separately. So the situation is where you set the stage with precision and clarity. You're going to avoid being ambiguous, and you're going to provide specific context. So for instance, during the team presentation last week, so that's an example of how to start it. During the team presentation last week, you're precise and clear. Then you want to talk about the behavior. So directly address the observed behavior, ensuring focus on actions witnessed personally. So steer clear from assumptions or subjective judgments. For example, so I'm going to continue with the first example I shared. During the team presentation last week, I noticed that you seemed unprepared and struggled to articulate key points. Impact. So now we're going to look at the impact part. Emphasize the repercussions of the behavior using I or we to convey what you're trying to share. So we're going to continue the example. As a result, the overall impression on the client was one of uncertainty, potentially jeopardizing our relationship with them. So throughout this process, the key is to seek constructive solutions rather than placing blame. Our goal is to nurture growth and an improvement within the field education journey. So this holistic approach ensures that feedback comes with a transformative force for you and the student. So throughout this process, remember the importance of seeking positive solutions rather than assigning blame. It's about fostering growth and improvement within, again, the educational journey. So we have shared some tools in the chat, the engaged feedback form, and then also the S-bar. So Dr. Brene Brown offers suggestions in approaching feedback, and her tool is linked to this in the chat, and it includes messages about when one knows they're prepared to give feedback in an engaged way. And the S-bar, which is situation, background, assessment, and recommendation. Use page 4 or 5 in getting right to it. It's a kit that's also helpful to review with your team. Next slide, please. All right, technical standards. As a part of the admittance program here at U of M MSW program, all students receive and agree to and are expected to follow the school social work technical standards. And so you're going to find a link in the chat. It's important that field instructors are aware of these technical standards, as this is a measure we all use and we're all able to use together as we work with our students. This is often the first policy we look to when concerns are arising. We encourage you to review this information and use it as a guide and resource with regard to your student expectations. So these standards not only focus on academic performance, they also emphasize the abilities and attributes that are essential for a profession, including communication, effective verbal and nonverbal skills, the ability to listen objectively, including intellectual and cognitive skills. So how important it is to critically think, apply problem-solving skills, apply knowledge to inform practice, taking responsibility for your actions, and considering the impact of others. So this section also includes attendance, being punctual and dependable, managing time, observing deadlines, and accepting and integrating constructive feedback in the classroom and in field. And the last section is emotional and behavioral readiness, which includes seeking appropriate help to ensure personal needs do not interfere with their performance. Being able to adapt to change, maintain respectful relationships, and demonstrating progression of the social work competencies. All right, next slide, please. So we'd love to hear from you. We're going to have a large group discussion at the moment. Next slide, please. So let's kind of get a little bit more engaging right now. I want you to think about the great teachers and supervisors in your life, those who left a lasting impression on you. In the chat, I want you to share your thoughts in just 2 or 3 words. What did they do well as you think about those great teachers in your life? So many wonderful examples. So they encouraged, listened, and cared. I'm hearing a lot of good listening skills, built and leveraged relationships, gently nudged me outside of my comfort zone to help me grow. So providing that safe space, that comfortable space to make mistakes and grow, cared about me as a person. So that empathy was there, that compassion was there, recognized strengths and clear feedback, was solution focused, reflective, and available. There were clear expectations and support, and got to know my strengths and interests. So there's that personable part that was also important in forming those relationships. So these are all wonderful examples of great teachers. Very strong attributes. So equally important when we're thinking about our teachers in the past, what didn't quite work for you in their approach? So I want you to kind of shift focus and think about what didn't quite work for you in their approach of other teachers in your life. Don't be shy. It can be simple as if they weren't available or excessive micromanagement. We're open to hearing your thoughts. Punitive, dismissive, unavailable, did not value my abilities, made me question myself in a negative way, not delegating or providing opportunities, unavailable, inconsistent, so not knowing what to expect, felt judged in regards of my age. So there's that difference of intergenerational components. Took personal offense when I made a mistake. They took it, it was like a reflection of them instead of it being a learning opportunity. Given new responsibilities without trainings. Absolutely. These are all good examples of what doesn't work what didn't work for you from previous teachers. So now I want you to think about the kind of teacher or supervisor you aspire to be. What qualities and approaches would you like to embody in your role as a field instructor / teacher? Approachable, dependable, personable, supportive, and patient. Yes. Melody, that is very well written. Demonstrating loving accountability, high support and high accountability. That's like very clear. And kind, it's clear. Flexible, patient, connected. I'm seeing flexible, clear expectations, non-judgmental and open. These are all qualities of a healthy learning environment. And I know you're typing it in the chat right now, but if you want to write it down on a Post-it note or in your notes as a reminder, when you're seeing your students, this is how you want to approach, teaching your students as a reminder. So I want to thank everyone for participating, and we're going to, I'm going to turn it over to Natesh, and we're going to have another poll question.
All right, so here's our poll question. The SBI method of giving feedback is an acronym representing which of the following? Situation, behavior, impact, situation, benefit, intent, or solution, behavior, influence? All right, and you all got it right. So the SBI method stands for situation, behavior, impact. Thank you all for paying attention. All right, so I am here to talk to you a little bit about what field education looks like at our school. I know many of you have probably had MSW students from other schools of social work, and for some of you, taking a social work student is relatively new. So we just want to go over the particulars of how it is that we define our field education roles at the University of Michigan School of Social Work, what our supervision expectations are, as well as the assignments that students complete in their field courses. So if we could go to the next slide. All right, so let's go ahead and start by differentiating the roles in field education. So we have the field faculty member, we have the primary field instructor, and then for some students, there's also a task supervisor. Those terms are often confused. I think you'll sometimes hear students maybe use those terms interchangeably, but they all mean very distinct and different things. And so we want to take a moment to really define what they mean. So starting with the field faculty are University of Michigan School of Social Work full-time faculty members. And so our entire appointment as field faculty are really dedicated to field education. Every single field faculty on our team is a licensed master's level social worker. And we each have very significant experience, both in social work practice as well as social work education. And so each field site is assigned a field faculty member, and that person really serves as a primary contact for both the field instructors and the students who are placed at the site. The field faculty are also the instructor of record for your students' field education courses. And with your input, the field faculty are actually the ones who go ahead and assign the grade that students receive in their field education courses. So I think the important thing to remember is that first and foremost, field faculty are educators. So we're really here to guide students in developing the fundamental skills and competencies of the social work profession. And I think sometimes what folks forget is that the field faculty are also here for the field instructors, right? So we're here to support you in really thinking about how it is that you can develop a robust educational experience for your students. And so really as field faculty, we try to build strong working relationships, not just with the students, but also with our field sites and our field instructors. And so if you ever have any questions, really your first point of contact is reaching out to whoever your field faculty liaison is. Okay, so in addition to the field faculty, we have our primary field instructor. And in accordance with our accreditation standards, the primary field instructor needs to have an MSW from an accredited program. And they also have to have 2 years of social work practice experience that they accumulated after they received their MSW. And kind of in addition to that is if the field instructor's role requires them to have licensure in their state, we also require that the field instructor have an active license and that they kind of disclose that information to our program. The primary field instructor is required to provide students with 1 hour of supervision a week, and that could either be individually or in a group setting. And I think, again, like the field faculty member, we also see our primary field instructors as educators. And so they really work directly with the students to establish their learning goals, their assignments, the activities that they're going to be completing in field. And then they also provide kind of the regular coaching and feedback that really students benefit from. And then they also submit evaluations at the end of the term around student learning and performance. In addition to the primary field instructor, some sites are going to have a secondary field instructor or a task supervisor, and that really depends on the individual field site. Unlike the primary field instructor, the secondary field instructor or the task supervisor does not have to be a social worker. So this might be someone who has a social work degree. It also might be someone from a different discipline. But typically there's someone who is very familiar with the work at the field site and may even be the day-to-day contact for the student. So really like the primary field instructor, we also expect the secondary field instructor and the task supervisor to be involved in the education of the student. So also kind of working to establish learning goals, assignments, and activities, providing feedback and coaching, and then at the end of the term also providing an evaluation that we use to determine the student's final grade. And I think kind of the most important thing to remember here is that if a student does have a secondary field instructor or a task supervisor, they're also required to be meeting with their primary field instructor for the weekly supervision. And so the student might have the two field instructors, but the primary field instructor, we would need to make sure that they're meeting weekly with them for their supervision. Okay, so the other thing that we have on the slide here is a note about students' field schedule. And so a student's field schedule is really going to it's going to be determined by a variety of factors. It could be the field education course they're enrolled in. It could be the amount of credits that they elect. The important thing to remember is that students need to be logging a minimum of 16 hours per week in field. So typically about 2 full work days. And again, depending on the student's schedule, that might be a little bit higher. So it could be 24 hours a week or up to 3 days in field. And there are also some students who have elected additional field credits. And so their hours might be even a little bit higher than that. The important thing to know is that students are working towards a total hour requirement every term. So it's usually 228 or 342. And those are hours that they're accumulating over a 14-week term. And so we use the 16 or the 24 hours a week really to guide students in estimating their weekly workload. But students will likely have to log a couple more hours occasionally during the term in order to meet that final term total. Another question that I often get from field instructors is some schools of social work differentiate between direct hours and indirect hours. And our School of Social Work does not do that. And so we don't really make a distinction between direct hours and indirect hours. Our expectation, though, is that close to all of the hours that the student is using in field is in some way tied back to the social work competencies. So really, that's the thing that we center, is making sure that in most of the hours that they're logging in their field experience, they are directly doing something that allows them to practice the competencies. I kind of told you that the hours and the schedule might be variable. And so kind of where it is that you can find out what your students' hours and field schedule is going to be. You can either ask the student, you can ask your field faculty liaison, and we'll talk about the educational agreement in a moment. And that's another place where you can kind of find that data. The other thing to know about our field schedule is that we do operate on an academic calendar. And so if a university break or holiday falls on a field day, we don't necessarily expect the student to be working. And so we expect the student to really be proactive about informing the field site and the field instructor that they have that holiday coming up, and then kind of making a plan with you about how to manage that workload expectation. The other thing to know is that there are breaks in between terms. And so we have 3 terms in a year. We are currently in our spring-summer semester. So spring-summer goes from May to August. We have our fall semester that goes from September to December. And then we have our winter semester that goes from January to April, because here in Michigan in April, it is still winter. And so students are also responsible for keeping track of their hours in field. We have some field sites that have a very structured process for how it is that they expect students to do that. But we really encourage you to work with your student to kind of figure out how it is that the student is going to be logging their hours and how it is that you're going to be kind of keeping track of that and probably approving them on a weekly basis. One easy way to do that is to have students put the hours that they've completed in a week into their supervision agenda for the week. And that way you kind of have a weekly log of what the student has completed as well as the hours that they've accumulated. We do not ask students to submit their weekly hours to us as field faculty. We kind of trust that the student and the field instructor are keeping track of that on their own. But if there are any questions or concerns, the field faculty might reach out and ask for an hours log. But really the way that students and field instructors verify student hours is in the educational agreement, which we'll talk about in a moment. And it is kind of just verifying that total hour requirement. So like has the student completed the 228 hours, for example. Okay, I think that's all I have for that slide. That was a long slide. All right, we can move on to the next one. All right, so talking a little bit about supervision. So like I said earlier, our expectation is really that students are receiving at least 1 hour of supervision per week. And this really should be protected time where the student is not just kind of receiving guidance on the assignments and the tasks that they're doing, but is also an opportunity for them to reflect on their learning and their growth as a social worker. And so one kind of framework that we use to help students to reflect on their field experience is the idea of the what, so what, and now what framework. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that, I can drop a link in the chat of a resource that really helped me to understand what that means. But typically it is kind of like thinking about an experience, describing it, interpreting it, and then thinking about next steps. And so that link that I kind of shared there kind of gives you some sample questions that you can ask to kind of get your students to start thinking through the what, the so what, and the now what framework. But yeah, so I think going back to thinking about what the purpose of supervision is, we really want that to, not just be time for students to reflect on the work that they're doing in field, but to really connect their day-to-day tasks to the social work competencies. This is also a really great time to bring in the educational agreement or the learning contract we're going to be talking about in a moment. It's a great opportunity to talk through ethical dilemmas, to kind of guide students through the process of using the NASW Code of Ethics and thinking about how it is that they can balance their different responsibilities as professional social workers. And I think it's also a great time to think about where the learning is going, right? So we typically ask field instructors to use a scaffolded learning approach. So really, starting students off with more simple entry-level tasks, and then as they're kind of demonstrating mastery of that, kind of allowing them to take on more advanced or more sophisticated tasks. And so supervision is really a great time to check in with students about, is it time for you to kind of take on some more responsibility now or to kind of work a little bit more independently and to reflect on that process a little bit. The last thing I'll share about supervision is that when I was a field instructor, one of the ways that I also use supervision was to help students with job prep. So typically closer to their, typically closer to the end of their field experience, talking through with them, what types of careers you think that you want to pursue after you graduate with your MSW? What are some ways in which I can help you with a job search or interview prep or cover letters and resumes? Students are also getting that support within the MSW program, but I think as field instructors who are out there doing the day-to-day work, you're also really great resources to support students in that process. Okay, next slide, please. Again, as I mentioned before, I think one of the ways in which we like field instructors and students to be able to structure their supervision time is by using a supervision agenda. And let me kind of open this up as a question to the group, but thinking about kind of your own professional experience, if you have worked with students before, what are some ways in which you see a supervision agenda as kind of aiding the learning experience? And I'll also invite maybe one or two folks to unmute and answer, just to kind of bring some other voices into the conversation. All right, so I see keeping us on track, not getting on a tangent with something that is not really relevant to the work we're doing. It helps guide the discussion and review the personal learning objectives for the student, provides expectations and consistency routine, potentially decreases anxiety, yes. Yeah, so asking the student to bring an agenda really helps the student to be the driver behind their own learning and self-reflection. I think that's really crucial and critical. And then making sure the topics stay on the radar, serving as a reminder to both, serving as a reminder to us both so that we can brainstorm beforehand. It's a good record over time, yes, of kind of measuring how students are developing. Yeah, and some folks who have not used an agenda before, but kind of see the value of being able to use it. Yeah, so all of that is true, and all of those are the things that I was going to share. So I think the most critical thing to remember is that we really do want students to be in charge of their learning experience. And so the supervision agenda really gives the student an opportunity to say, these are the things that I'm experiencing, these are the things that I'm thinking about. And depending on how students are using the supervision agenda, you as a field instructor get a sense of how they're doing, right? So are they being critically reflective about their work? Are they considering things like privilege, oppression, diversity, and social justice? Are they thinking about their personal and professional growth? Are they understanding, the tasks that you've assigned them? And so we really do encourage you to use the supervision agenda and for the student to really be the one who initiates that. And the link that we have here in the slides is to some sample supervision agendas that you could use. We don't have a standard template that we require. We really leave that up to you, but those sample agendas might give you an idea of how it is that you want to approach it. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so we are now going to talk about the 3 main assignments that students complete in their field education courses. And the important thing to remember here is that these assignments repeat for every single term that students are in field. So we often get a question about, I already did a placement verification form, do I need to do it again? And the answer is yes, you do. You need to do it for every single term that you are enrolled in field. So I'll just kind of very quickly go through these and talk about the ways in which they interact with the field instructor role. So the placement verification form is an online form that the student will initiate. And it's going to ask the student to kind of verify where their field placement is. It's going to ask them to verify who their field instructors are. And it's going to ask them to verify kind of what their weekly schedule is. And also there are some yes and no questions about safety policies and then liability insurance. One thing that I'll say about the schedule that's in the placement verification form is that we do expect there to be some flexibility there. So the goal is to really get students thinking about how it is that they're going to meet the total hour requirement for the term. But we do expect that, there might be, some weeks where students might be flexing their schedule due to either, schoolwork, personal things that are happening in their lives, or requirements from the agency. So just kind of giving you that heads up that there is flexibility built into that. Once the student submits that online form, a notification will be sent to the field instructor's U of M email account. And so that's kind of where you would go to click on the link to go in and approve the form. I often ask students to kind of complete this form with their field instructor present. And one of the nice things about that is, if there are any questions that come up, the student can kind of consult with the field instructor. And then once the student submits the form, they can actually then kind of help the field instructor to access the U of M system and then to approve it. So kind of the takeaway with the placement verification form is I would encourage you to kind of do that with your student and kind of lean on their support and being able to move through the process. Okay, the second thing here is a key learning experience assignment. And this is an assignment that the field instructor doesn't necessarily need to be involved in. So it is completed by the student and it's turned in directly to the field faculty member. And the assignment really asks students to reflect on one thing that they identify as a key learning experience for the semester. And it really could be anything, right? It could be a really productive interpersonal interaction or a really challenging interpersonal interaction. It could be a presentation that they gave. It could be a training that they went to. It could be a variety of things. Really, anything that the student is really identifying as something that was really significant to their learning. We encourage students to kind of talk through that with their field instructor to really just reflect on, their learning in field. But it's completely the student's responsibility, and there's nothing that the field instructor has to do administratively. The last assignment that we have here on the slide is the educational agreement, also known as a learning contract to some folks. And this is really the biggest assignment. And so because our students are in a field placement that is affiliated with our MSW program, we really expect students to be continually practicing the 9 social work competencies. And so what the educational agreement does is really supports both the student and the field instructor in connecting their work back to the competencies. And so there are really 2 or 3 parts of this that I'll kind of walk through. So at the very beginning of the semester, and so this is after the placement verification form is completed, the student's educational agreement will open up. And at that point, the student will be able to see the 9 competencies, and then they'll also be able to see about 4 or 5 assignment choices that we've provided them that match each of the competencies. And so typically what we do is we then ask students to kind of take that educational agreement to their field instructor and to kind of walk through each of the competencies and the assignment options and to select something that both the student and the field instructor can commit to doing for the term. There obviously is some flexibility in there. So if you select an assignment and then it turns out that, there isn't really the opportunity to do that, the student can always go back and select a different one. But we really want to make sure that, students at the very beginning of the term have a plan for how it is that they're going to be practicing the competencies. So at the very beginning of the term, you're kind of selecting those assignments together. And then throughout the term, the student is going to be working on justifications, which is kind of a paragraph, maybe 2 paragraphs that really tie the specific thing that students did in field back to the assignment that they selected, as well as the social work competency and the practice behaviors. What I will say is that, we as field faculty all kind of have different approaches to how it is that we expect students to write those justifications. So I would check in with both the student and the field faculty liaison that you're working with to kind of see what their expectations are around that. I think the takeaway is we do not want students to wait until the very end of the term to start writing their justifications. I think that is a common mistake that folks make. And I think the problem with that is, one, it doesn't really give students the opportunity to be continually reflecting on their learning throughout the term. And 2, it's just a lot to do at the very end of the semester. So I think one of the things that you can kind of support your students with as field instructors is to kind of remind them that that's something that they should be doing, right? So kind of bringing that educational agreement back into your weekly supervision meetings and saying, yeah, here's this assignment that we talked about at the beginning of the term. What's some progress that you've made on that? Let's kind of talk through how it is that you can reflect on that experience and start to write out some of those justifications. Towards the end of the term, what's going to happen is there's going to be a deadline for when students need to have all of their justifications complete. And then they will kind of go in and rate themselves in terms of their development around the competencies. And we can actually move to the next slide because I believe that's what the next slide is. Excellent. Yeah, so the students are going to rate themselves in terms of the competencies. And then once they submit that, that's going to go to you all as field instructors. And you're also going to go ahead and rate them on the competencies, and then also kind of enter any comments that you have regarding the students' progress in field. What we have on the slide here is the rating scale that we use for each of the competencies. The thing to know is that if you are rating a student at not competent or advanced competent, you're going to have to write up a justification as to why the student is at that level. To kind of set some expectations, typically students are at the emerging competence level. It may be that students, there are some competencies where they might be at competence or advanced competence, but our expectation is that this is a learning experience for students, right? So they shouldn't be at the competent or advanced competent level at the very beginning of their field experience. And I think very few folks are actually going to get to that point by the time they graduate from our program. And so I think one of the things that we just want to acknowledge, right, is that, our students are students, right? And so they should have really the space to grow throughout their field experience. And I think there also is the understanding that, once they graduate with their MSW, they're going to continue to really develop their understanding of the competencies as social workers out there in the field. So we sometimes kind of get some pushback from students who want to be at the competence or the advanced competence level, who I think are, thinking about it as an academic course where there's like an A that they're striving for. And I think we try to set the expectation that, you are a student learner, and so you really should be at that emerging competence level. Okay, I think that we are ready to go to the next slide. All right. So the next thing that we have is the site visit. And like the other assignments that we talked about, the site visit is something that we hold every single semester. And it is the field faculty, the student, as well as the primary field instructor. And if there is a secondary field instructor or task supervisor, we also ask for that person to attend the site visit. The site visit could either occur in person or over Zoom. That's something to kind of check in with your field faculty member about. And while the site visit can really happen at any time of the term, we typically like to hold them closer to the midpoint of the semester, just so students have had a little bit of an opportunity to kind of dive into the semester, get started on some of the tasks and assignments, and then kind of like have a lot that they can reflect on during the conversation. Scheduling the site visit is really the responsibility of the student. And so I think all of us as field faculty have a calendar system where kind of students can take a look at our schedules, match those up with their schedules and the field instructor schedule, and then determine a time that works for everyone. And just to kind of give you an idea of what's talked about at the site visit, I think it really depends on the field faculty member. It also really depends on where students are within their field journey, whether they're at the very beginning of it or they're more, towards the end. But I think kind of some of the main points is we want to kind of think about how it is that the students are practicing the competencies. We want to think about ways in which they're noticing privilege, oppression, diversity, and social justice coming into their work and their practice. And then we're also kind of thinking about how it is that they're tying the content that they're learning in their other MSW courses into the field site, right? So how are they kind of tying the theoretical knowledge with the practice knowledge that they're gaining? And like I said, I think those are just some sample topics, but typically the site visit is really, catered to where the student is developmentally and what the specific site is. The thing to know about the site visit is we do not want field instructors to wait until the site visit to surface student concerns. And so if you are kind of having a performance concern with the student, if you have any other concern with the student, we really encourage you to bring that up with your field faculty member as soon as possible. And we can kind of brainstorm with you how it is to approach that situation. And that could be anything from kind of a more informal conversation to a more structured performance learning plan. But kind of the idea is we don't want to spring things on students during the site visit. So we don't want to kind of catch them off guard with something about their performance. We really want to dedicate specific time to be able to address that. And the other reason for that is that the site visit is really about connecting students' learning back to the competencies. And so we don't want to take up that time dealing with performance concerns. We really want to use that as educational time. Okay, I think we're ready for the next slide. Okay, so one of the things that we're going to do in a moment is go into breakout rooms and talk about some tips and common experiences that we want to share with field instructors, so ways in which you can really optimize your relationship with your students. But one of the things that we want to make sure that everyone is talking about is their expectations for their students. So one of the things that we sometimes notice is that conflicts arise between students and field instructors when there are discrepancies in terms of what to do when specific challenges arise. And so one of the ways in which you can be proactive about that is having a conversation early in the term about what your expectations are when, a student is sick and can't come to field, or when they're running late and aren't able to, attend on time, or if there's, bad weather and they're not able to kind of commute into the field site, or if they're having car trouble, right? And so really setting those expectations at the very beginning of the term so that you're not making assumptions about how the student is going to show up professionally, but you're really setting that expectation for them. And then the second thing is kind of thinking about how it is that you can help students to think about how to show up in field. So one of the questions that we sometimes get from students is, I was invited to this meeting at my field site, but I wasn't sure if I, should have said something, or kind of like what my role was, or, what it is that I was supposed to be doing in that space, right? And I think, for many students who are in their first term of field, there's probably a lot of observation. And so that's another question that we get from students, right? Is that, does observation just mean that I'm sitting there, or are there specific things that I should be reflecting on? Are there, questions that I should be asking myself, or kind of contributing to the conversation? And so again, just kind of like setting those expectations for students, right? So if you're inviting a student to a meeting, if you're asking them to observe something, are they there to just listen? Are they there to speak? Are they there to kind of like be reflecting on the experience and bring that back to supervision? Setting those expectations for students is going to be really helpful. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. All right. So I think we are now ready for our small group discussions that we're going to be having in breakout rooms. And so each breakout room is going to be facilitated by a member of the Office of Field Education team. So you'll have a facilitator with you to kind of guide you through some content and some discussion questions. But yeah, are we ready to go ahead and open up those rooms?
Yes, I just opened them.
Awesome. Thanks, Kendra. All right, we'll see you back here in a little bit. Okay. They're in breakout rooms.
Welcome back. So I hope your small group discussions were productive and filled with valuable insights on field instruction tips. It's always inspiring when we're connecting with our colleagues and we hear diverse perspectives and ideas and tips. So I'd like to hear from a few of you on what is one key takeaway, whether it's from your small group discussions or from this training, that you plan to utilize in your role as a field instructor. So you can raise your Zoom hand, you can unmute, you can share in the chat, whatever you prefer.
I'm going to call out a couple of people from my group because they said some really good things. Sonia, can you share some of the good wisdoms, the good nuggets you gave us? Do you feel up for that?
Sure. So we were just talking about like the relationship between field instructor and student, and expectations that you have in terms of student performance and capabilities, and how it's, you over time, you experience many different students with many different skill sets. And a lot of that variation happens because, students come in with different bases of experience into the program. So, just constantly reminding yourself that you are a teacher and they're a learner, and to manage your expectations in terms of deliverables and that kind of thing. And we always look to our field students as members of our team, and we work very, very closely with them. So just being constantly reminding yourself that this is a learning experience for the student, and to manage your expectations.
Thank you so much. And Becky, I really liked what you shared about vulnerability. You up for sharing that?
Sure. So being vulnerable about as it was mentioned, of not knowing everything, and also that a lot of this is new to me too, with the learning educational agreement and going through and trying to kind of just walk with them that it's a learning, challenging experience, and I'm also learning from them too.
Thank you so much.
Chris and Trisha both wrote in the chat that have similar themes of using agenda for supervision. And Trisha, you really emphasize on reminding yourself that you're the teacher versus supervisor. And it really gives that space of making mistakes and learning and moving forward and really walking beside your student in this process. So thank you for sharing that. To wrap up, we hope that you had the chance to reflect on how you'll use this information in setting up your learning environment and ways that you'll be able to provide supervision and feedback to your students in field. So we're hoping that's your takeaway right there. So we're going to go to the next slide, our final poll question. So as you reflect, and we're going to continue to reflect on this training and the valuable insights that were shared and the tools that we've explored, I want you to consider where your confidence stands right now. Take a moment to select the option that really resonates with you the most. So as you leave the training today, my confidence level as a field instructor is higher, about the same, lower, or unsure. Oh, wonderful. Higher, about the same. And we're always open to feedback. And so if there's anything that you would like to share with us to improve this training, please feel free to leave a comment on the evaluation. We're always looking to fine tune and be better. So we thank you for that. Next slide.
All right, and so this is just a note for folks who signed up to receive social work CE credits for the session today. You should receive a link to a survey in about 3 to 5 business days. And in order to receive the CE credits, you have to complete that survey, and then you'll get your CE certificate at the very end of that survey. If you have any questions about CE credit, the place to go is our social work CE office, and their email is up here on the slide. So questions, please direct them to ssw-continuinged@umich.edu. All right, and I think we have one final slide. Awesome. All right, so I think just to kind of end for today, I think on behalf of the entire University of Michigan School of Social Work community, we really want to express our gratitude to you all for, both the incredible learning experiences that you're creating for our students, as well as the enormous amount of time that you are contributing to the mentorship and the education of future social work professionals. And so there are a couple of things that we do to try and give back to you all as field instructors. So one way is through continuing education courses like this one. So we typically have a couple of field instructor trainings throughout the year that you will receive the information for. But we also have a pretty large catalog of social work CE courses that you can find on our website. And many of those are going to be available to you for free when you register. So something to kind of take a look at. The other thing to know is that as active field instructors, you all now have a University of Michigan login and account. So one, you are a part of our university community, but two, that also gives you access to many of the resources that we have here as faculty, students, and staff. I think one thing in particular that is really beneficial is library privileges. I know when I was outside of the university environment, working in private practice for a couple of years, that's the thing that I missed the most. But with your U of M login, you can access a variety of free journal articles, ebooks, other kind of like trainings and resources as well. And then, yeah, I think the link that we have on the slide will also take you to some of the other field instructor benefits that you have access to. Yeah, so those are all just some very small ways in which we hope to give back to you and express our appreciation to you all as field instructors. And yeah, just to end on the fact that we recognize that you are making an incredible contribution both to our school and to our profession. So thank you for all the work that you do. All right, so we have a little bit of time left. I think we have about 20 minutes left to answer any questions that you have for all of us. So feel free to put something in the chat. If you have a question that you'd like to say verbally, feel free to unmute. But yeah, we're here to answer any questions that you have.